on the air. Flip Weinberg in the house, retired former assistant district attorney and former president, Mississippi Prosecutors Association. Morning, sir. How are you? Good to see you.
Good morning, Paul. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, man, I thank you so very much, man. Let's just see if we can unpack some of this. First of all, for people who don't know what's going on, the double murderer, James Williams III, is set to walk out of a Mississippi prison May the 16th, which is only days away. The State Parole Board has agreed to that release. He was convicted in 2005 of shooting death of his father, James Jr., stepmother, Cindy Lassiter Mangum, after failing to poison them to death. He was 17 years old at the time of the killings. It happened in South Jackson. Zeno Mangum was on with me last week and was quoted as saying that Williams murdered them, threw them in the trash bags, put them in the Rubbermaid trash can, and threw them out like trash. And then we have some more on that story, too. But what was your involvement in this one, Flip?
Well, I was at least one of the trial. I honestly don't remember out of however many cases I tried over the years, over 40 years of prosecution. I don't remember whether I tried it by myself or tried it with another assistant DA, but I was the trial attorney on the case for the state of Mississippi.
But bring some of your memories in here, because what you thought about the case now, specifically, and I understand it's kind of hard at our age to kind of bring back some of those memories, but they all kind of come flooding back when you hear the parole announcement. So your thoughts on this?
Well, I read the Court of Appeals opinion in the case in which they affirmed the convictions and sentence, of course, and I had to do that just to refresh my memory of some of the facts, but those don't include what I remember most about that case. And what I remember most about that case is seeing that defendant, James Williams III, he may have been 18 by the time we tried him, I'm really not sure, but 17 at the time he committed the crime. I remember seeing him in the courtroom, and I remember his eyes more than anything else. He had the look, just this hollow, cold look, as if there was nothing behind those eyes. It was almost frightening, quite frankly.
Was there any drugs involved, alcohol involved when he did this? Was that brought out at the trial?
That was never an issue at the trial, no.
So what you saw in his eyes, as far as you know, and all the testimony he was given, was just James himself? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, he'd been in jail, so he wasn't doing drugs at the time of the trial.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about when the incident was committed, when the murders were committed.
There's no indication that he was under the influence of anything at the time of the commission of the crime. If there had been, he might have tried to raise it at trial as a defense, but there's no indication of that.
Flip, I think you're quoted as saying that it's one of the most horrendous that you've seen.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you can read the opinion and see what the facts were. It's easily available on the Internet. That's how I found it yesterday. Just look up James Williams III versus State of Mississippi, and there was a Court of Appeals opinion in the case that was well written. I think by Judge Carlton on the Court of Appeals. Yeah. And it was an open and shut case for the most part. The defendant gave 2 or 3 different versions of what had happened and how it happened, and but among those was his second statement to the police was a confession. So that's basically probably what convicted him.
I think he tried to bring one of the explanations, he tried to bring the 15-year-old into it, saying he committed one of the murders.
Yeah, that kid's name was White, I think was his last name.
He never spent any time in jail, did he, at 15 years old?
Honestly, I don't remember, Paul. Yeah. I really don't know.
The situation where the way that the murders were committed, too, and he had also tried to apparently, and I guess this was either proven or alleged during the trial itself, tried to poison them?
Yeah, he tried to poison their milk. Tried to put poison in their milk, and apparently that didn't work fast enough for him.
How was that learned? How was that brought in as testimony, which was, I'm sure, was pretty concrete?
I honestly don't remember.
Jeez.
Obviously, we had some proof of it. Probably came from him, or it may have come from the white kid. May have come from the white kid. I'm not sure.
I'm curious. As it was, this was appealed, was it not? And did the appeal win, or how do we wind up from someone who is convicted of no parole? And I understand the U.S. Supreme Court plays into this also.
Well, the Supreme Court, sometime after that conviction, came down with a decision. I think it was Mitchell v. Alabama. I'm not sure. Miller v. Alabama, maybe, in which they said that children under the age of 18, that is, people under the age of 18, couldn't be summarily, automatically sentenced to life without parole. In other words, the court had to take into consideration all the factors that might play into a sentence and make the determination of whether it should be life without parole or life or some other sentence. And so his case was appealed based on its merits and alleged errors and so forth, and was affirmed by the court system. And so that's why he's still in jail today, of course. But I don't know in the history of his case whether or not he ever brought post-conviction relief or tried to try to get his sentence modified from life without parole to some other sentence. I'm just not that familiar with the history of the case after I left it.
You know, I was looking because it always brings up was Lyle and Eric Menendez and the Menendez brothers, and I was looking to see what their status was. They are still in jail. But 18 years as a former assistant district attorney and also former president of the Prosecutors Association, when you serve 18 years, basically that's all he has served so far, of 2 murders after being convicted of basically life in prison. How do you arbitrarily unpack that?
Well, I can't. No, I can't get my mind wrapped around it. It makes no sense at all to me. My theory has always been when someone is murdered, the person who murdered that person should be in jail for as long as their victim is dead, which means they should be in jail forever if they're not going to be put to death. You know, in Mississippi and everywhere else, back when you had the death penalty for just an ordinary murder without all the extenuating circumstances and aggravating factors and so forth, there were a lot fewer of them. And I'm not saying we should go back to that, but I just think people should be aware that there is a certain deterrent effect in what the court does. And in this case, I do not understand how he could possibly be paroled.
You read the whole thing, and I did too. I read where he's contrived, or he says he's found God, and et cetera, et cetera. Then you start reading that, and the things he's gone through, the steps he's taken, and the emotional part of that is also some luggage that you have to consider. But 9 years per murder there, and as you said, I think it has consequences in the future when people hear this and see this. But should the parole board take that into consideration, that he's gone through these rehab processes?
Well, I mean, in the case of murder, no, in my opinion. Murder is just one of those crimes where the penalty should be absolute. There shouldn't be any question about it. It should never be mitigated just because of, I mean, obviously he would try anything he could try to get out at some point.
Sure.
So it makes sense. It makes sense what he's doing, but it doesn't make sense what the parole board's doing, in my opinion, because again, like you say, this was 2 murders. So you do one life sentence, do another one. We had a guy in Clarksdale one time. I think his name was Bryant Miles. He was a habitual offender, and a violent habitual offender, and we convicted him. He got life without parole on a drug charge, just a simple little drug, cocaine possession. He came before Judge Webster, who was a county judge sitting as a special circuit judge.
I know him well.
And this guy, at his sentencing, when he was sentenced to life without parole based on our habitual statutes, he said, "Judge, what can I do? I can't do 2 life sentences." And Webster said, "All I can tell you is you're just going to have to do the best you can." Words of wisdom and timely put.
Really. And then we have this poor lady, Tasha Shelby, who's sitting in there on shaking baby syndrome, and everything screams to give this woman another chance. I do not understand it. More coming up with Flip Weinberg next. Back with our visit with Flip Weinberg, retired former assistant district attorney and also former president of the Prosecutors Association. Man, there was so much in here. Williams got the gun from his room, shot his father, and when Mangum walked in, the mother in the room, she started screaming he shot her too, according to the records. Jury convicted Williams of murdering the couple. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. Zeno said Williams had become eligible for parole every time the family had flooded the parole board with letters and appeared before the board. Last year, the board assured her and her family that Williams would never be paroled. And on her birthday, April the 15th, not that long ago, just a few days, she opened something from the mailbox. It was a letter from the parole board. Letter said, "We understand this decision may come as a disappointment to you," Stephanie Walters, board's executive secretary, wrote, quoting her. "However, the board believes the offender, James Williams, is able to be a law-abiding citizen and that the parole supervision would be more beneficial than further incarceration." Well, Mr. Chairman, Belk is quoted as saying that Mangum's family admittedly chose not to reply or schedule a meeting with the parole board. Now, Zeno was on the air with me, and he said that he had received no notification, and they didn't return that. We go to that particular one because of an illness in the family or something. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't know anything about it, but I do know this. The parole board, particularly in murder cases, should be very careful to make sure that they give the victim's family every opportunity to be heard on the subject. And I just can't imagine a scenario in which that didn't happen in this case. It's amazing to me that that, and also the history of the case. The parole board had reasons for denying it every time up to now. I saw where Steve Pickett, former member of the board, I think, talked about it a little bit, and he said he didn't expect he would ever get parole, and so that just adds to the surprise or shock that it happened this time.
Well, it also adds an element of curiosity to it, why you have that major change between the chairmanship of one to the other, how they could be that much difference. But let me ask you this, though, Flip. Why would it matter if a family cannot attend, if there's a valid reason one way or the other, or even if they don't want to attend? Why would the parole board base the qualification for a parole on the attendance of the family one way or the other? Even if they decided, I don't care, let him go, I don't really give a damn anymore. If the guy's a double murderer, should they base it on the attendance of the victim's family?
No, they shouldn't base it on that, but I assume that, in fact, I know that the members of the parole board are only human, and so if they believed that the family had no interest in seeing that the incarceration continue, then they think, well, why should we? But I don't believe that this family deliberately didn't make the hearing.
Yeah. Well, you say be cautious. It seems to me that anyone on the parole board ought to be cautious also of making a statement there, unless it's absolutely valid, when the statement, and again he's quoted as saying that the family admittedly chose not to reply or schedule a meeting with the parole board.
Yeah, I just don't believe that. I do not believe that they would deliberately not attend the meeting.
Well, but here's the problem I have with that one, and you're a prosecutor. If that statement has some curiosity and some validity, then it lends its lack of assurances on everything else.
Yeah, I mean, sure. And another thing, in one of the pieces I read dealing with this parole, it said that the district attorney's office didn't object to it. Of course, I assume that there's probably nobody in the Hinds County District Attorney's office now who was in the office back when this was tried. And so, yeah, I can understand. I mean, they're busy. They have a lot to do, and so they may not be keeping up with past cases. But even then, maybe somebody from the Attorney General's office or somebody from law enforcement should be contacted and given the opportunity to be present. I realize they say they contacted the DA's office, and DA's office didn't object to it. But, it needs input from somebody who knew something about the case.
From your experience, and again, we're talking with Flip Weinberg, former assistant DA, from your experience, how important is the fact, even if this merits a release, that wherever this person, man or woman, is going to be released, there's some assurances and confidence from the people in that community that he or she is safe. In other words, that the rehab is valid. In other words, are you releasing a psychopath in the midst of the community?
Well, again,
does that play into it?
Having seen his eyes at the trial, I can assure you it plays into it for me. I don't think any community would be safe.
Man, he must have made an impression all those years ago.
Well, he did. I'm telling you that looking at him, you can't, back then you certainly couldn't see any possible hope of rehabilitation. But again, these are two murders. Rehabilitation, the prison system, the correction system, has some functions. Rehabilitation is one of them. I noticed where his lawyer said indicated that he thought maybe that was a primary. That's not a primary function of the prison system. We don't have prisons to rehabilitate. It's good when they do. And on property crimes, perhaps they can. But a price has to be paid for the commission of a murder, for taking a human life, and in this case, taking 2 human lives. The price needs to be paid, and the price is you spend the rest of your life in jail. Those people are dead forever.
Yeah. Did you follow any of the Frederick Bell in that parole situation?
I did not.
I'm wondering, because we had some point in here where he said he was contrite, and we mentioned this earlier, and he was asking for forgiveness. But then again, Zeno was on the air with me, and he said he's never contacted the family as far as he knows. And I think if you're going to start that process, making an apology or just asking to meet with the family one way or the other would be part of that.
Well, one would think, but again, I mean, that too shouldn't matter to me. He took 2 lives. He should be in jail. He should give up his life, at least in the sense of having a free life.
All right. Now I'm going to ask you the $64,000 question. What do you think is going on with the parole board?
Or are you going to give me $64,000 for my answer?
I'll give you a coupon for something. But well, you know what? I think we have 2 tickets to the Morgan Wallen concert. We'll give you that.
Yeah, great.
I'll get sued for that.
I notice a lawsuit has been filed, or at least suggested, and
yes,
I suspect if it turns into a class action lawsuit, more than $64,000 will be involved.
Ooh, geez. I know people who flew in to watch this.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's just tons of expenses that people incurred in order to be able to attend that concert. That's a whole other deal. But what was your question?
And by the way, those bed and breakfast lodging was not Motel 6 prices either.
No.
My question is,
nothing in Oxford is Motel 6 prices.
From the vast experience of Flip Weinberg, what do you think's going on with the parole board?
Well, honestly, I don't know. I've been out of it for 4 years since my retirement. I haven't really kept up with them. But, I mean, the parole board is made up of human beings who want to believe that our prison system has an effect on the people that are inmates there, and that there is some hope of rehabilitation. And there is hope for rehabilitation for some of them. Again, I just don't think that murders fall into that category.
Well, the last 2 of this Bell situation where the guy goes, shoots one guy and travels to Memphis and shoots another, and both of them were horrendous in the manner that it was done, and then get a parole. We're basing our curiosity and our quandary on 2 of the most heinous crimes that you could get. We're not just talking about some, shoplifting here, or some accidental, or maybe something that should have been a manslaughter.
Well, I can't emphasize enough. I mean, murder shouldn't even be a parolable offense.
Well, maybe we can get you back and talk about the Morgan Wallen thing.
Well, I wasn't involved in it. Thankfully, I was not involved in that. I had no part in it. Much as I love Oxford and Ole Miss and all, I didn't make it for that.
Well, you have any great stories that you want to tell us?
No, but I will say that I'm sitting here.
Well, hang on for a minute, because we got a short term left. You came all the way from Meridian. I want to give you an extra shot here. Final segment coming up. So frame something in your mind for closing arguments on anything when we return. Coming up next. When you look at some of the cases that you've handled over the years, which ones are stand out most memorable?
Well, to be honest with you, that was one of them. Another one was one that I lost when I was in Clarksdale.
Ooh.
And it was a homicide case in which a man shot a guy who was just trespassing on his island in Moon Lake. And that one's always kind of haunted me, to be honest with you.
What were the names of that one? Because it's Mohead Island, I think you're talking about.
Actually, I think it's called Alcorn Island.
Is it? Really?
I'm not absolutely certain, but
Could be.
Somewhere in the back of my mind, I think that's it. It's Moon Lake is a really great little resort
I've
type
fished
place.
it 1,000 times.
Well, it's good for not only fishing, but there are a lot of really nice, expensive properties around the lake, and a lot of really good people go and hang out up there. And,
it has transformed into a kind of a respite for people in Memphis and other places to vacation home. Back when I was fishing it, there were only the place on one side. It was basically it back where Conway's was, and
you have Catherine's restaurant now. There's Uncle Henry's restaurant has reopened up there.
Catherine's was a great place.
It's a pretty cool place. Yeah, great food.
My wife's grandmother had a home up there and on the lake, and it was a great place.
It really was, but and I enjoyed being. I was up there for 7 years, I guess, as an assistant DA. That immediately before I came to Jackson.
Who was the DA at that time?
A guy named Lawrence Mellon, great guy.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
terrific guy. He was the DA the entire time I was there. When I came to Jackson, I came to work for Ed Peters, and then Fay Peterson took over, and Fay was great. We had some really good times, and I remember our last month in office. We successfully tried 3 homicide cases in that month. It was a good month to go out on, quite frankly.
Clarksdale was one of those places where it had the potential to grow, but there was a lot of people keeping it down because of a lot of different reasons. I'll never forget. I had one of the merchants tell me one time, because at one point, and you would just have to experience this, the road to Memphis, Tennessee was in such disrepair that you needed 8 sets of tires to get back and forth. And being a guy who was just getting into politics too, and this is back in the days of Charlie Sullivan. That's basically when he was running, and it was the first campaign that I was involved in. But I had a merchant tell me we don't want to fix that road because if we fix that road, they're going to go to Memphis to shop.
Yeah, well,
and that's
true.
Stuck with me. Yeah.
That's true, but Clarksdale. When I grew up in Macomb, and Clarksdale to us in Macomb, Clarksdale, Greenwood, Greenville, these were all garden spots.
Yes,
beautiful garden spots. Of course, Jackson was too back then. So it's been interesting, if not fun, to watch these places evolve to what they are now, which is not what they were.
Well, I hope retirement is kind to you.
It has been so far. It doesn't suck, I'll tell you.
You play You play any golf or fish or?
I play very little golf. Play little cards now and then, but that's about it.
Well, so you got to watch out who you play cards with, though.
Well, I keep a close eye on them.
Because there are some people out there when you're playing cards, you got to watch them. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, I tell you, no, it's nothing like that. It's a game. We play a game in Meridian that is not played anywhere else that I know of. It's called Cotton Row, and normally played with 5 people, but it can be done with 4. And it's just fun to be with the guys. I enjoy it.
It's fun talking. Have you ever heard of a game called Tonk?
Yeah, sure.
That was real popular for a long time.
Well, they say this game reminds people of Tonk. I never knew what Tonk was, and so I don't have a basis for comparison. But this is a strange game.
There are things that this audience has never thought when they tuned in that they were going to hear anything about Tonk.
Well, that's right.
How do you spell Tonk if I would want to go to the website and look it up?
I would assume it's T-O-N-K, but of course,
that might be the French version.
When I was growing up in Macomb, there was a bunch that played a game that they said was similar. They called it Red Ass, so I don't really know what Tonk is.
Well, you be careful if you Google that one up. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, really.
Hey, Flip, it's been a pleasure, sir. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate it so very much.
Thank you again for having me. I enjoyed
You
the
got
visit.
it.
Anytime.
Jeffrey Hewitt and Meg coming up after the news, which is next.